This is Zudi Jasser sitting in the chair for Seth and Chris, who are away today. And thank you for joining me in our last hour now. I am going to bring on Shireen Qudosi in a second, but I wanted to thank all of you for being with me, letting me talk about some of the topics that get marginalized in the Trump derangement syndrome that seems to occupy the space between the ears of most of the media in New York and Washington and elsewhere. And unfortunately, they seem to ignore what's happening across the rest of the planet or even our own country with major cases of counterterrorism, counter-radicalization, including a major federal case in Detroit that had some big news out this week of a charge that was dropped. And so give me a call, 602-508-0960, and join the conversation with us here on the Seth and Chris Show. I'd like to introduce all of you to Shireen Qudosi. Shireen, welcome to the program.
Hi, Zudi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Shireen is the director of Muslim Matters with America Matters. In 2017, I want to tell all of you about what they're doing. It is unbelievable work, and I've been honored to be part of their coalition. America Matters launched a campaign against FGM, or female genital mutilation, one of the most horrific yet rampant crimes against young girls done globally. And they called it Stop FGM. It's a hashtag that we should see more prevalent and trending. It's driven by their CEO, Samantha Narove, a veteran, and a diverse coalition of survivors, activists, media professionals, writers, and scholars. Men and women with unique backgrounds who came together to amplify their voices to stop FGM in the United States. And you can follow their campaign on Twitter at StopFGM. So, Shireen, welcome to the program. I want you to open by educating us a little bit about and reminding us about the cases of the physicians in Detroit, and then we'll get people updated about what happened a couple days ago about one of the charges dropped. But tell them about these doctors in Detroit and how much precedent is being set by their charges.
Of course. So the Detroit FGM trial really came to national headlines last year when 44-year-old American-born Muslim emergency room physician Dr. Jamala Nagarwala, who, by the way, was educated at Johns Hopkins Medical University or medical school, she's from the Detroit-born Muslim community. She initiated the practice against two 7-year-old girls. And in what can be described as sort of a back alley after hours at closed doors, she performed this on site at a medical clinic owned by another Muslim doctor in the community. Two little girls were brought in by their parents from across state lines for female genital mutilation. And it has irreparably mutilated them. It has destroyed their ability to feel the most sensitive parts of themselves. Even after they marry later in life, they will be completely prevented from being intimate fully with their own husband. Now, what is most damaging for me when I read the statements from the girls as a woman and as a mother is when you ask little girls what happened to them, these girls don't even understand what happened to them. They've been made to be sexualized while they're still in their childhood. These girls believe that something was wrong with their tummy and they have to go to the doctor for that. So these girls trusted their parents, and they were brutally cut.
And I think what's important for people to understand is, if you look at the World Health Organization and other descriptions, they have 5 types of this act that are done. And, some will say, well, type 1 is the most severe, type 5 is mild and includes just a little nick that some try to minimize as being no different from male circumcision. But at the end of the day, bottom line is that it's all mutilation. There is no way to do a procedure on a 7-year-old, let alone a newborn young girl, that doesn't have some mutilation involved, number one. Number two, the intent of these procedures. And, there were interviews done by some of the local media in Detroit, by their local Fox station and also a few other local stations in which they talked to the community there. And they said, well, this is the Dawoodi Bohra community. It's a marginal sect. And if you look actually of these procedures done, while some are done by non-Muslim communities across the world in Africa, India, and elsewhere, this is not something specific to that one community. This one community had a network of ability to have physicians because it is more tribally networked, if you will, because of its heterodoxy. But at the end of the day, There was an imam in Northern Virginia who only 6 months ago, Shireen, as you wrote about, talked in a sermon in which he legitimized it, not only comparing it to male circumcision, but said that women are born hypersexual and they need to have this procedure done to normalize their sexuality.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. One of our coalition members is Maria Tejer from Teo, and she is from the Duwiti Bora community. A survivor herself, speaking out against this, doing incredible work. I spent an hour today talking to Amar Karimji, who is well known as an activist against FGM, as a male coming from a family of Duwiti Bora women who have had this done to them. He's also speaking out. So this is being pushed back within the community, beyond even just the Duwiti Bora community. The best example I can give you is, and I think the most poignant example for an American audience, is the Maasai warrior community. The Maasai who are pushing back against this happening in their sort of tribes. And what's so special about them is that the Maasai are, the best we can describe it is that they're the most authentic to the origins of their tribalism. So they haven't changed that much over the years, but they are really aggressively pushing back against this aspect of their culture. There's a story in the New York Times today about a Maasai girl who has helped 50,000 girls escape cutting. So when we just celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we're still ignoring the conversation on what slavery and oppression looks like today in the larger part of the world. In the States, we can't even decide if this is wrong or not. And as a developed nation, we haven't even hit the basic threshold yet, whereas a 17-year-old girl from a Maasai community is helping 50,000 girls escape. Meanwhile, we're twiddling our thumbs about whether this is racist or a cultural practice or a religious practice. And all it is a ritualistic tradition that needs to die off. And I think really that's what 21st century freedom looks like, the right to escape ideology, ritual culture, to emerge as an autonomous, free-thinking individual, to recognize that our sexuality is an extension of our voice. And the Maasai, for example, are a great example of that ability of people fighting to alter their culture without losing their identity, the same as you see in the Duwiti Bora community, the same as you see in many other communities that transcend ethnicity, race, and religion.
And I think people should not be deceived by thinking this bizarre and misogynistic practice belongs to one specific sect. That imam in Northern Virginia, I don't even know if he was fired yet. He should have been fired. They tried to walk back his sermon that we tried to spread. You even posted a petition that asked for him to be fired. As is typical, the board of that mosque in Northern Virginia walked back his role, etc. And this was only thanks to a video that had been posted. And this was a Sunni mainstream, so-called mainstream imam. It wasn't the Duwiti Bora. It wasn't from any other community. This is a real problem. And it is quite prevalent. And I think Muslims need to own it in order to prevent it. And, hats off to the prosecutors in Michigan who devoted a lot of resources over time to gathering. This was a crime done across state lines. Kids were being funneled in from Minnesota and elsewhere from families that were trying to get this done in Detroit because they found a couple doctors that had a after-hours setup in which it was done. And this week, Shireen, the U.S. District Judge Bernard Friedman granted a defense motion to dismiss a conspiracy charge alleging Dr. Nagarwala and Dr. Attar transported minors to Metro Detroit with the intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. And the news report said that while female genital mutilation is a federal crime, the allegations do not constitute criminal sexual activity, the judge said. So we can have that sort of debate, but what's significant about this dismissal of this one charge?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and we have activist lawyers on our coalition looking into this to determine the best strategy forward. From what we have so far is specifically the language with intent that the minor engage in any sexual activity, and FGM does not constitute sexual activity. And what's so bizarre about this duty is that the reason FGM is performed is to prevent future sexual activity and to prevent desire. So it is very, very linked together. The judge passing this tells me that he's not, or he or she is not well informed on the issue. You have already sexualized the child the minute you have performed FGM. They're still a child, but they're looking at this child as a woman. And what's more alarming is that FGM, as we know, is a conveyor belt of issues. It leads to the normalization of domestic violence and abuse. It leads very often to forced marriage. So this is a very, very connected issue. And when I spoke with survivors when that ruling came out, They were in tears, Judy. They were in tears, not understanding how anyone could not see this as a sexual activity or a sexual crime.
This is Zuhdi Jasser. We're going to continue talking to Shireen Qudosi on this case, this landmark case, which is the first of its kind that the DOJ has arrested and is trying a couple doctors for the horrific crimes of FGM. When we come back, we'll talk about the recent effort. While the other charges still exist and they could still end up with 20, 30 years behind bars, the bottom line is as many precedents in this case will be used for others. And we'll continue to talk about whether they can dismiss the charges of the sex crime. This is Zuhdi Jasser with the Seth and Chris Show. We'll be right back. This is Zuhdi Jasser. The doctor is in the house filling in for Seth and Chris, who are away today, and I am pleased to be able to bring you the real news, the information that mainstream media seems to ignore that's happening not only globally but domestically. In the first few hours, we talked about Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, threats globally. This hour, I'm honored to be joined by Shireen Qudosi, the director of Muslim Matters with America Matters. In 2017, America Matters launched a campaign against female genital mutilation, or FGM, called Stop FGM, hashtag, driven by the CEO, Samantha Narove, and a diverse coalition of survivors, activists, writers, scholars, medical professionals, including myself. And it's been great to work with Shireen. And I invited her on because this week, U.S. District Judge Bernard Friedman dropped one of the charges against two physicians in Detroit that are under arrest. Actually, I think they're no longer in jail, right? They had their bail posted of something like $1 million by somebody, right?
The doctor did, yes.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So their bail was posted. Hopefully they have ankle bracelets on, but at the end of the day, these so-called physicians committed horrific crimes after hours against young girls that were trafficked, 7, 8, 9 years old, from Minnesota and elsewhere. And they committed this procedure, which they call female circumcision, but is more like female genital mutilation. And this week, one of the charges of criminal sexual activity was dropped. Before the break, we were talking about what that can mean, as this case sets a lot of precedent. Let me set the framework, if you will. Right now, a lot of the narrative about the threat of Islamist groups is coming out of a lot of the evidence that was challenged or unchallenged in the Holy Land Foundation trial in 2008. That was one of the first trials that ended up, after a second try, convicting 6 board members for funneling monies to Hamas. And a lot of the materials released by the FBI, the DOJ, and others under testimony ended up being used to appropriately identify groups in America as either being unindicted co-conspirators or involved in the network of Islamist groups. So this case and this trial, which is due to happen in a few months, I think, and Shireen can update us on that, I think some of the things that happen here are important for us to pay attention to, whether it's in Phoenix or anywhere across the country. Shireen.
Yeah, absolutely. The trial is coming up in June. It's been postponed from October to November and then now to June. And so what I'd really like to do is empower your listeners, your listeners who are naturally going to be very, very supportive of what we have to say, and they're here and they're listening to us. They're going to go back and they're going to engage with people from a different ideology who will say, well, this is Islamophobia or this is racist or whatnot. And the best way that I can empower the listeners is if you go and you look at what's going on in our country right now, the polarity in terms of the DACA ruling, the coldness of the law, and the reality these families face, the pain of separation. So everyone has seen the videos, especially the one coming out of Oakland, and it's really hard to ignore the video when you see the dad being separated from his family. On the same note, there's a disconnect between the clinical way this judge is looking at the federal FGM statute, deciding that it is not considered a sexual activity, versus the reality of these young girls face from being permanently cut off from themselves. That is what the media is not showing you, and that is the reality. So if we can show empathy for people being separated from their families temporarily, we need to have empathy for young girls who are cut off. Their genitalia is cut off. They will never get that back permanently. And the media doesn't show the survivors' voices. The media does not cover the reality of what these girls are doing. These girls don't have a voice. It's up to us to be their voice. And,
I think the judge ignorantly, no different than how many of the judges, Shireen, have we pulled our hair out listening to a judge tell a family, oh, this is not an honor crime, when they are somehow, as we saw here in Phoenix, Nur al-Maliki was killed by her father because she decided to do things that her parents supposedly didn't approve of, and he killed her. And the judge at the time of the ruling said, oh, this is not an honor crime. He didn't honor anyone. I'm not going to call it that. When in fact, by denying the fact that it was an honor crime, that judge actually gave oxygen to the Islamists and others to honor things that are horrific. So I think at the end of the day, the judges don't realize that just because the intent of the physicians wasn't directly sexual, if anything, it was anti-sexual, by them taking this out of the mix and denying the fact that the procedures actually done to desexualize women, and by removing it, they're denying that fact. They are disempowering reformers, disempowering those of us working on the front lines of universal human rights.
Yeah, Zudi, this is what I like to call the paradox, where judges are so concerned with cultural sensitivity, but genuine cultural sensitivity means understanding the brutal reality, the underbelly of our culture as well. Our cultures are beautiful, but they're also archaic, and they're stuck in a really primitive era. That is the work of reform. That is the work of progressive activists trying to shed light on those issues, trying to evolve. And so when judges pass rulings like this, when the media doesn't cover these issues, they're not doing any sort of service or credit to the work of the activists, like, for example, the one that I spoke to this morning, Amar Karimji from the Djibouti Bora community, who has spoken out, even as a male, against FGM. He's gotten death threats from his own community. Where's our protection? Where is our peace in the Atlantic? Where's our program with Don Lemon? When is that going to get covered if we're going to be honest about cultural sensitivity?
And I think as we hear the president today declare today Religious Freedom Day, people sometimes are stymied because the response of the attorneys here, the attorney for these so-called physicians, is saying that this was simply a religious freedom procedure of female circumcision. And under the guise of religious freedom, the rest of Americans, even on the conservative side of the equation, are saying, well, hold on a second, is this going to be a slippery slope in which other procedures, we see in Europe, for example, the Jewish community is seeing their rights to circumcision and other things that have been done for thousands of years being taken away under the guise of human rights. And I think this is very different. We've seen some differences with, for example, Alan Dershowitz, who bizarrely has come to the defense of one of the defendants, and he claims he's simply a consultant. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be careful with the moral equivalencies between male and female procedures, as this is not done simply as circumcision, but more as desexualization and mutilation.
Yeah, if I can speak, and obviously you have that medical background, so you could speak about it much more clinically, but if I can just speak really plainly as a woman and as sort of a millennial still, is having male circumcision doesn't prevent a man from having an erection, whereas having female circumcision or FGM, female genital cutting, and whatever you want to call it, having that prevents us from even wanting to be intimate with women. One of our coalition members is an Egyptian lawyer who's won the 3 counts of FGM cases in Egypt, and he is a man who speaks honestly, saying that it's not just something that affects the women; it's something that affects men. It inhibits their ability to have really deep and meaningful relationships with women. So it really comes down to the fact that there's no comparison. You are robbing women of their ability to feel. You are silencing their voice sexually. And it's the closest I can say is female circumcision or FGM is like castrating a woman. That's the closest example that I can give that's very, very plain and honest.
And in the honor of religious freedom, we want the religious freedom of every young girl born in the United States to have the ability to choose for herself what she does and does not do and how she expresses that, and FGM prevents that. So thank you, Shireen, for all your courageous work, for your work towards reform and your work with Muslim Matters, with America Matters, and with your work with the Stop FGM campaign. We'll be right back. This is Zuhdi Jasser. This is Zuhdi Jasser, finishing my third hour here, filling in for Seth and Chris on the Seth and Chris Show. It is great to be with all of you, and I hope you had a great Tuesday. We are talking about all those things that seem to be marginalized as the obsession with Trump derangement syndrome continues in the mainstream media, so-called mainstream media. And hopefully in this time together, I was able to get you up to speed on some things domestically and globally that are affecting our security, affecting where we are in 2018 and what the outlook is. We talked last hour about Iran, about the changes there, and that we should be paying attention to the revolution there. I hope more than just a few companies in the United States begin to provide technological support to a revolution that needs to bypass blockades to the internet that have prevented them the ability of communicating, and would allow us to see the crimes against humanity that are happening on the streets of Iran, no different than they're happening on the streets of Syria, and to read the signs that are being carried by tens of thousands, if not more, on the streets of Iran. Join the conversation. Number 602-508-0960. 602-508-0960. Call. Let me know what's on your mind. I want to talk about, I think, one of the most significant things that came out this week, which was also missed by the mainstream media, is, do you know that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is arguably one of the largest global movements that threaten American security, it is a movement that obviously started out of Egypt with Hassan al-Banna, Sayyid Qutb, but now includes a metamorphosis into thousands of different offshoots of groups, into movements, into even non-Arabic lands, and host movements in Pakistan and Afghanistan, Iran, and elsewhere. But the mothership of the Muslim Brotherhood is in Egypt. It also has offices in London. And the investigative project published a story by Hani Ghoraba yesterday that talked about why the Muslim Brotherhood this week decided to declare the U.S. an enemy state. So why we sit and scratch our head, and Senator Cruz's legislation that called for declaring the Brotherhood a terrorist organization, which I'm in favor of as far as the Egyptian Brotherhood's concerned, and I think we can take country to country. Many of those Brotherhood organizations are obviously terrorist groups. I think there's no clearer definition of what they are than the fact that this week they decided to declare us an enemy state. And why do they do that? Well, it is sort of a culmination, and Hani describes it in his story. It's a natural endpoint for a movement that is on the run, that the dictator el-Sisi has decided, as we see in Saudi Arabia with the marginalization of the Brotherhood supporters, of the princes that were supporting the Brotherhood being marginalized. We see the Egyptian dictator deciding to marginalize the Brotherhood. Now, I disagree with almost all of the means that he's used to do that. It's not going to, by doing it forcefully, by doing it through torture and punishment, it's actually going to empower them. But the bottom line is they see themselves dwindling, and they have long thrived on victimization. But this week, the Arabic, now, I think what is most telling is the difference between what came out on the Egyptian Arabic site for the Muslim Brotherhood and what came out in their English site out of London, of Ikhwan Online, or Brotherhood Online, as they call themselves in English. And they announced last month and reiterated it this past few weeks that in regards to the United States, they are an enemy. And they did this in follow-up of President Trump's designation and the movement, the decision to move the embassy from Israel to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And they published it on their Arabic language website. They said in Arabic, Jerusalem is an Islamic and Arab land for which we make blood, freedom, and life, and we fight every aggressor and every supporter of aggression. And it called upon the unified Islamist and Palestinian response to ignite an uprising throughout the Islamic world against the Zionist occupation and the administration, American administration, in support of the occupation, and on and on. So this is obviously a call to war. This is huge. When you're talking about counter-radicalization, when you're talking about fighting ISIS and those who may be looking for an ignition to commit an act in London or in New York or God knows where, at the end of the day, if we're going to do counter-radicalization, we need to be fighting this. Now, their English site, when we come back, I'm going to read to you what they published in English. Now, it's similar in its intent, but its tone is very different. It calls for peaceful marches, etc. But the authors are similar, but they try to deceive the West on what they're really trying to do. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a global war against an ideology. Now, our best assets are Muslim reformers, are the anti-Islamists on the streets of Egypt and Iran and elsewhere. But if we miss these warnings, we are going to be in trouble. And we need to step away from the partisan obsessions of Washington. And when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Call me at 602-508-0960. This is Zuhdi Jasser filling in for Seth and Chris on the Seth and Chris Show. We'll be right back. This is Zuhdi Jasser sitting in for Seth and Chris on the Seth and Chris Show. It is great to be with all of you. We are talking about topics that few want to talk about, and I'm going to break a little news here before we finish the hour. A Turkish electronic army has hacked into some major American pundit Twitter accounts, including Greta Van Susteren's account, including Eric Bolling's account on Twitter. So if you go to their Twitter handles, you'll see just propaganda from some Turkish Islamist Ottoman Erdogan types. Erdogan is the Islamist ruler of Turkey, the head of the AKP party, which is the Muslim Brotherhood Party of Turkey. So these guys have an electronic army, no different than Assad has an electronic army. Now, we don't know if this is from the government or what, but I can tell you that if you go to their accounts, it says that it's been hacked by the interests that support Erdogan. So bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, this is a NATO country. This is a country that just recently built one of the largest mosques in America, including the one in Maryland and others. And we have not paid much attention to the fact that Erdogan is an Islamist with global hegemonic desires that for some reason is still part of NATO, for some reason has not gotten the pressures that he should. We just recently had a conviction of an American of Turkish descent that was bypassing American sanctions and providing money to Iran, that the Department of Treasury successfully convicted in American court. And that was just a few weeks ago that trial ended with a conviction and had little coverage in the news, where an American of Turkish descent was bypassing money to Iran in violation of American sanctions. So regardless of what's happening in the deranged coverage of much of the media, at the end of the day, the kinetics of this Cold War are getting warmer against the Islamists with interests in Qatar, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan, Turkey, and elsewhere. And you need to start paying attention. Let's go to Pete. Pete, thanks for calling the Seth and Chris Show. This is Zuhdi Jasser.
Oh, hi, Zuhdi. I was just listening to Ryan Morrow of the Clarion Project, and he said something that absolutely shocked me. He said that we should advocate to terrorism against Iran. We should try to blow up their military installations, attack their computers. Even says we should try to raise money to cause chaos and terror inside of Iran. Do you believe that? That sounds something like ISIS would do.
No, when you say terrorism, I don't think he used the word terror. He's talking about revolution. I think he's talking about regime change. And regimes like the Assad regime in Syria and the regime in Iran are not going to walk away with peaceful protests. That ultimately, if you look at some of the operations that have been done covertly by intelligence operatives, it includes, remember, we're talking about, if they're going to get close to having a nuclear weapon, the best mechanism for preventing that is obviously destroying those entities that have that. So that I would not call that terrorism. If we know, for example, that the head of North Korea has a facility that would be in our interest to destroy, I don't think that would be terrorism. I think that would be an American security interest.
Well, I think you can kid yourself, but I think if you go into foreign countries and start blowing things up, it's terrorism is terrorism, regardless. But I'd like to talk about Ryan Morrow and the Clarion Project. What that is, it's a neocon advocacy group advocating the neoconservative foreign policy. People like Frank Gaffney, Daniel Pipe, Sheldon Adelson.
Well, if you're going to name drop, are you going to ask me a substantive question, or you're just going to sort of do pejorative neocon name calling? Because I'm here to actually discuss topics with you rather than simply throw around name calling, which I think our listeners are far above that.
We have advocated a policy of militarizing the Middle East, attacking people, giving people arms to attack. It's called the genocide of Muslims in the Middle East. What we need to do, I believe, is demilitarize the Middle East, starting with
Assad. How about Assad? So Assad's genocide of the Muslims and non-Muslims, mostly Sunnis of Syria. That's not on the top of your list there.
No, because Assad was fighting ISIS. You were willing to fight to get rid of Assad. You were willing to fund solipsistic guys who'd go over and chop off the heads.
Wow! So
sexual slavery.
So is your name Pete, or is it Bashar's propagandist that seems to have called our program here at the Seth and Chris Show, or Putin? Is this the Russian media? Hello, are you working for Russian television?
Well, I mean, who are you working for? Are you working for the United States?
I'm a free American citizen who cares about my country, cares about freedom and universal human rights, and will never provide apologetics for a ruthless genocidal criminal who, by the way, Putin has propped up, who you can't even seem to utter a negative word about, while Putin provides funding to the genocide of Muslims and non-Muslims in Syria. So do you think that's in American interest, what Assad is doing in Syria?
I think that Assad was a stable factor in Syria for 40 years until we went in and funded, like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, give billions of dollars to overthrow the government for no good reason. If they won, the ISIS would have won. We'd have been in there fighting them instead.
That narrative didn't even come to be hardly even 1% true. ISIS didn't even exist till 2013. There was 24 months of revolution that was radicalized because the Obama administration sat on its hands and barely was able to train 50 to 100 soldiers in a revolution that needed tens of thousands. So to give me the old Rand Paul line that somehow ISIS was created by the American administration is just complete nonsense. That is propaganda and is belied by the facts on the ground that there was no Jabhat al-Nusra, there was no radical Islamists for the first 12 to 24 months of that revolution.
Rudy, the Islamists in northern Iraq sent the people over into Syria to start the revolution.
Well, we can debate, if you want, what happened in Syria, but the bottom line is Assad opened the floodgates of the borders of Syria because that was the only way to legitimize further authoritarian, militaristic approach to the moderate neighborhoods. It wouldn't have needed American jets to finally have a General Mattis, now Secretary Mattis, actually execute a more thoughtful plan against ISIS that actually decimated them. If Russia and Syria, Assad actually cared about getting rid of ISIS. They never cared about getting rid of ISIS. They just wanted to decimate the moderates and allow the radicalization of the people that were trying to revolt against their government.
Well, we can agree to disagree whether sending arms into Syria to destabilize the country was in the interest of America or even in the interest of the Muslims who all got killed. But are we going to continue militarizing the Middle East by giving millions of dollars to Saudi Arabia?
Well, the vacuums, thank you for calling, Pete. And the vacuums that you want to see America avoid will get filled by, I guess, your buddies in Russia, your buddies in China, your buddies in Iran and the Khomeinist regimes across the planet. The most evil players in the world will fill the vacuums if American leadership does not exist. So, yes, I think America has helped some of the wrong folks, including some Islamists, but we have to have a strategy to help those who share our values. And we need to create this Commission on Radical Islam that begins to focus the crosshairs of what we support domestically and abroad in the United States, and to figure out who are our friends on the ground early on in revolutions. This is Zuhdi Jasser. Give me a call at 508-0960, 602-508-0960. We'll be right back on the Seth and Chris Show. This is Zuhdi Jasser finishing out a coverage for Seth and Chris as they were away today. And it was an honor to be with all of you, and always humbling to sit in this chair and have the doctor be in the house, as they say. So we covered a lot of ground today. Follow me on Twitter at drzudi, Zuhdi Jasser, Jasser, Dr. Zudi Jasser on Twitter. And also come to my website at www.aif, as in form, aifdemocracy.org. Listen to my podcast. We talk about a lot of these things every week on Reform This. You can download it at iTunes and at SoundCloud. Don't ignore the media globally. America is the most connected country on the planet, and yet somehow we get sucked into these vacuums of obsessions with partisan politics in Washington and elsewhere, and we seem to ignore the transforming world around us. And there are things we can do to help our allies on the streets, help our allies fighting against tyranny in Iran and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And this is not about, if we don't want to send our sons and daughters to fight wars, we need to help those on the ground, both electronically and on Twitter and social media, technologically, and whatever else it takes to protect them against oppression, to protect them against tyranny, and to help those nascent revolutions. Revolutions take generations, and everything has to start somewhere. As I mentioned earlier, we broke some news that a couple American pundits, Greta Van Susteren, Eric Bolling, had their Twitter accounts hacked by Turkish Erdogan activists, and I'm sure there's more out there. So the world is getting to be a messy place. I still think disruption is a good thing. Disruption brings about bottom-up change. It brings about reform because the establishment no longer has the chokehold on a people. And Syria has been decimated by the Assad regime, which allowed the fomentation of a foil that they used to legitimize destruction, and that foil was ISIS, a evil entity that was hatched by the ideology of Saudi Arabia, hatched by an Obama administration that allowed it to get hatched while they ignored other things that could have been done. But this whack-a-mole program will continue. And I think the only way America can step away from the whack-a-mole is to begin to advocate for our own principles and make sure those who come here share our principles, and that we tighten up our immigration, tighten up our borders, so that we allow true Americans who share our values to come here, and also to advance our ideas abroad. Today, as President Trump called it, Religious Freedom Day, it's our first freedom. Enjoy that freedom. Many people are striving to get there. This is Zudi Jasser. It's been an honor to fill in for Seth and Chris. They'll be back soon. Stay tuned. Stay connected. Stay engaged with the world. All politics is local, and all reform starts locally. Join me on my podcast, Reform This, and I'll see you soon. This is Zudi Jasser. Take care.